Hi, my name is Dan. This is the Service Design Show, and this is episode 239.
We've all been there. You have the right tools, the correct processes, and the best intentions. And yet, things still go sideways. The project is stuck, the team is unhappy, and you're not getting the results that you want. What if the problem isn't the tools, but something far more intangible? The culture that you're working in. I think this is a puzzle every professional faces. And today, we are going to solve it together. Hi, if you're new here, welcome to the Service Design Show, where we invite the brightest minds in our field and explore what's truly needed to design great services that resonate with people, push businesses forward, and honor our planet. Our guest today is Dan Szuc. He's the co-founder of a company that's been helping organizations with the messy human side of work for over 25 years now. In fact, he's so passionate about this topic that he's written 2 books on it: Make Meaningful Work and Make Meaningful Culture. Now, what might surprise you about Dan is that before his long career in consulting, he had a very different passion: acting. In fact, he trained for 4 years in professional theater and acting, a background that, as he puts it, helped him to understand the importance of human interaction and relationships. I feel that his unique lens of the workplace is why he is the perfect person to help us tame that mythical creature we call culture. So in today's conversation, you are going to learn about the fundamental problem with how we perceive and think about culture, what a healthy, thriving culture looks and feels when it's working, the key elements that must be in place to make cultural change a reality, how to move culture from an invisible force to an explicit design object, and the one specific practice you can use to start shaping your own culture. One of my personal highlights from our conversation was when Dan walked us through an example of a tool called practice spotting. We took one of my biggest personal frustrations and used this tool to show just how tangible and actionable these concepts can be. So let's dive into the conversation and make sure you stick around until the very end because I have some closing reflections on our chat. I'm your host, Mark Fontijn, and this is the Service Design Show. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Nice to have you on. We are going to talk about sometimes abstract, complex, important, messy, super important topic of how to create meaningful, thriving culture. I think there is a lot of confusion around that. There is maybe a lot of frustration around that. I think it's something that every, human, but especially every professional encounters in their work. You have some experience with thinking about culture, working with culture, shaping culture. So this is going to be very interesting. Then my first question to you would be what do you feel is the fundamental challenge or issue or problem about how we perceive and think about culture at the moment?
Thanks, Mark. That's a great question to kick off with. I think just on that question, we could speak for hours.
We will.
So let's cover off maybe perhaps one core issue. If we're talking about, which I think we are, if we're talking about culture at work, I think one of the challenges right now, I would say within a business context, but I think it's slowly starting to infiltrate government, and it's slowly starting to infiltrate, and I'm using that word explicitly and deliberately, into education, which is culture. And as Josephine Wong defines it, the the definition of culture, which is the conduct, interactions, relationships between people in moments that matter, that affect what we call the conduct chain. I think when when we start to measure culture as very closely connected to business results, metrics, financial results, key performance indicators, and or other measures, that then can sometimes turn the interactions between people, teamwork, and the cross and interdisciplinary work that needs to happen, and it starts to feel like you're degrading the humanity in it, and it becomes very transactional because of those measures and because of those KPIs, equal to primarily and first and foremost financial results. So it becomes capital first over people first. We have a problem.
We have a culture regardless of whether or not we are actively shaping and designing, cultivating it. So even if we have a culture where it's capital first instead of people first, that's still a culture. And it's interesting to dive into that. But then, like, out of all the topics that could have sparked your interest, could you take us back to the moment where you felt sort of the itch and needed to scratch your culture curiosity? Like, what made you explore and go into this direction?
Say if we talk about the itch, I'd say the the itch is still there to a degree, and I'm applying uh, different ways to deal with the itch. Sometimes the itch goes away, which is nice, but it's still kind of there. Is having worked on so many projects in a number of different domains and industries, in predominantly big organizations and big multinational organizations, I've seen how collaboration and work between people can become unnecessarily complex at the expense of people's health. And this is something that Josephine Wong speaks to a lot more than I do, because she talks a lot about healthy intention in moments that matter, which is on the front cover of the Make Meaningful Culture book. But there's often a lot of processes and methods and other infrastructural elements that are placed inside the workplace that are intended to make the projects work better. But sometimes what happens is they tend to make the conduct, interactions, and relationships between people worse. It tends to erode the culture. So
Like
I
what? What are some of the things that make that erode?
communication, being able to just communicate clearly, um, all the varying degrees of conduct problems that exist around hierarchies, uh, issues in and around politics, when things are said, when things are not said, a lack of clear vision, a lack of a clear plan, a misunderstanding of requirements equal to what it is that we're doing, a non a vague understanding of what a value proposition is. And what happens is
Mm,
people kind of run with it without clarity on those things. And so to answer the question that you asked before, is I've seen this work really well in other contexts that are not business contexts. I've seen it work really well as we were discussing pre-show. I've seen it really well in, say, the production of a show in theatre, or in TV work, or in the making of a play with kids. I've seen it work, so it can work really well. It just, for some reasons, it gets overly complex and difficult in other contexts in business.
if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that healthy, thriving, meaningful culture is going to contribute to people doing a better job at work and therefore organizations being more successful in whatever success might be defined. I want to double click for a moment on, like I said, the fact that culture exists, whether you like it or not, and um, what kind of what kind of culture are we looking for? Because, like I said, a culture where capital, money, profit, revenue is the predominant driver is also a culture. It might not be a culture that resonates with you, but it's still a culture. So, what are we after here?
Culture does exist, whether people record it, document it, discuss it while it's happening. And there are different outputs and outcomes as a result of different cultures that lead to different results. The question and the opportunity is, do the existing cultures based on the existing socio-economic and political models result in the culture locally and globally that we wish to see in the world? And that is very easy to say, but not impossible to think through and to work on, because models are simply a thing that's made by people, and it's a problem statement or an opportunity. But what we're talking about when we're talking about culture is, culture exists, but what we're talking about is, through a tool that we created called practice spotting, that we mention in Make Meaningful Work and also Make Meaningful Culture. What we're trying to do is we're trying to make culture move from an implicit or unseen thing into something that is explicit, where people are not outsourcing culture or waiting for other people to take responsibility for culture, where culture through conduct and through practices, practically in moments that matter, can be distributed right across an organization, where that culture becomes more intentional and, one would hope, more healthy. Now, what are examples of that? Well, it's, to start with, it's encapsulated in the word sparkle. Excuse the Aussie accent there. Sparkle. So in on the front cover of Make Meaningful Work, we deliberately put make meaningful work. That's the statement in the question. How can we make meaningful work? And how can we move people from generally or generically a sleepwalking state into a state of sparkle? And that can be described in many, many different ways. And then we thought, well, it would be interesting to create Sparkle as an acronym. And what's made up of what makes up Sparkle is, it'd be great to continue to embrace cultures that are S for supportive, P for proactive, A for adaptable, R respectful, K for kind, L for listening, and E for engage. Now, that's not written in stone. That's sort of a fundamental starting point. But then when you work with different teams, they have an opportunity to determine what are the key values or the key practices that are made up of conduct that is relevant to the type of culture and organization that they would want. We would hope, and last point, we would hope in being involved with such organizations, that they would see the value in healthier cultures and healthier environments, which, by the way, is not about happy, happy, joy, joy all the time. But it certainly starts with creating cultures that are first and foremost trusting and safe, where people can be as open, as candid, as direct, as culturally respectful to the various people that are coming in based on their backgrounds or their cultures, so that what we're actually working on and we're defining is something that's valuable and meaningful. Versus what often happens between teams is, the culture exists, but it's not explicit enough equal to
Mhm.
do great work together.
What we're exploring in this episode together is that often in work, you might have the right tools. You might have the correct processes. You might have even the correct incentives. and still things don't produce the outcomes, still produce unhappy people. And one of the attributing factors might be the culture that's currently in place. And culture, like I said, is often this intangible dark force that's sort of hard to mangle. And what you're saying is no, it's not. It's actually something that you can proactively steer, contribute to, and you've got a approach and a process to do that. And you already mentioned practice spotting. Did I get that right?
Yep, exactly. Practice spotting. Yes.
Okay. Let's say I'm oblivious at the moment to the culture that is in place. I'm just passively consuming and experiencing the culture in my organization. Um, and I feel that that might be an opportunity to grow, to improve. Where do we start? What do we do?
Another great question. Uh, I'll take a little step back. Let's run with this logic for now. But Mark, you feel free to prod and poke and question it, because that's all part of what I'm about to describe. The logic says that what we're actually wanting to do is create cultures in which there is continuous, explicit, extrinsic learning and development. So, what that means is what we have present is curiosity and openness and adaptability, wanting to take responsibility, uh, an environment in which we're all learning and developing together. And if we can create that, what that means is we're helping people be more receptive to or ready for continuous change and transformation. What currently happens, I think more often than not, is a business runs along or a government runs along, an entity runs along and says, shit, we're in trouble. We're behind. We're not making things the market wants, or we're technologically behind, or something is enforcing a change or transformation. And then most of the people, a significant number of people in that organization, freak out. They freak out because suddenly they're they're being, in a way, forced to think about something else from what they're used to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very, very difficult for a lot of people. Now why? So the framing here is a person or a group's, a person, individual, team, or organization's receptiveness to change, improvement, and transformation. And what I'm suggesting is, for many of us, and I can't speak for the whole global education. I'm assuming certain educational systems, they tend to follow a very industrial age way of being educated, equal to following exams, following process, memorization. And so when you're thrust into situations that require an improvisation or some form of change, it's difficult. It's difficult for a lot of people. So coming back to your question around practice spotting, you asked about practice spotting and where to start. I think the place to start is to de- determine and try and understand where people sit between being open to the change and where we find there's resistance to the change, and then to begin to unpack that a little bit, and allow people through practice spotting to share stories in varying degrees between the closed nature and the open nature relating to the
Mm.
particular change or improvement that we're looking at, and then to determine what is the current conduct that's going on in the current state, and then how can we think about what alternative conduct is required, equal to what we call these moments that matter, that help distribute it from, I'm telling Mark how to change, I'm dictating to you how to improve, versus adopting that on something that you really want to take responsibility for, is the difference.
Let me know if I'm getting this Right, but I'm feeling a tension or maybe even a paradox over here. So um, you say that it's about learning, reflection, growing. Adopting practice spotting allows you to do that so that you can change your approach. Um, but if you are part of a culture where there is a command and control structure, where there's a strong hierarchical responsibilities, um, it feels like that culture in itself will might be hard to embrace something like practice spotting. So like there a catch 22 there, or am I getting it wrong?
I'm not sure it's a catch 22. I don't think you're getting it wrong either. I think I would suggest what you're saying is that it's a it's a it's a diagnosis of some sort equal to the organization that is either going to be in varying degrees receptive and open to some form of change, transformation, or improvement in fundamentally, or they're not going to be. And remember, we can't necessarily, this organism that we call an organization, we can't say it applies to a whole organization. There might be particular teams that are different in the organization, particular managers that are different within that organization, particular functions that are different in the organization. Um, but I would say in general, my suggestion would be that just talking about change and transformation doesn't necessarily necessitate or enable
Mm-hmm.
people to change and transform.
Yeah.
The 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 opportunity to change and transform comes through action, and the action that people embrace and take responsibility for should in effect be action that they really lean into. And if that can just be to start with a one-to-one relationship where it says, well, for Mark it's this, it's A,
Mm-hmm.
but for Dan it's B, and for Fred it's C, and they're all a little bit different, but collectively they they're taking us in a better and a more optimal direction. Well, that's already a good thing. It's already better.
More optimal direction, you said it's can be different for everyone, but that sparkle could be a first starting point to head towards, correct?
Yeah, I think so, and it's a system, right? So it's difficult for many people to get a head around a system because again we're not necessarily educated to understand the perspectives around a system, the dots that make up a system, how to connect them, and then how to make decisions in reference to that system. So there's other things that play into this that help people understand a system. So what are those things practically? They can be a business plan, they can be a vision statement, they can be a project plan, it could be a sprint, it could be
Mm.
anything that's helping people land what it is that they're doing to help with the collective outcome, but also how it is that we're helping them think about how they conduct themselves in the interactions and relationships between people in key moments that matter. And there are moments that matter that play consistently across any type of service or product design, development, and implementation. And then there are ones that are more unique or more special depending on the type of organization that you're working with. It can depend.
What the image that's emerging in my head right now is most organizations will have defined their culture to some extent, at least their values or what they stand for. Like you could argue that that is part of the culture they want to create. Um, from my experience, like in the majority of cases, that doesn't live up to the lived experience of people on the ground. And I think what you're arguing is that it's the actions that matter, and you reference to that as those moments that matter, right? Is that the connection?
Exactly. Bingo. Spot on.
Okay.
That's it. So
So, yeah.
there's two parts to that, I think. Unless you're part of a founding team or close to the core of a founding team or the start of a business, you may or you may not have a preview into the creation of those values. But if an organization grows, the values are often imposed upon
Exactly.
you.
Yeah.
You may not connect, you may connect to some, you may not connect to others, you may not connect to it at all, you may connect to all of it. It can be different degrees of all. At the end of the day, we think, as part of our hypothesis, or as you put it, our argument, is that if you can create a very strong connection between the values as written down and the values as embodied through conduct in action, in specific moments that matter, as part of the process methodology toolkit equal to delivering on products and services to help a business or an entity be more successful, the hypothesis suggests if you can do that, then you have a higher chance or probability of improving the culture,
Mm.
and you have a higher chance of creating a distributed ownership equal to the success of that entity. If you're disconnected from that, then what you're doing is you're turning up, you're getting your pay, you're doing perhaps the bare minimum equal to output. You might still be delivering on quality work, but you may not be as fully engaged in what that means equal to full the fullness of that success together.
Have you encountered examples where there is a written culture or predefined or a value statements, and an exercise where people have actually what's the word I'm looking for, extracted or extrapolated the lived culture? So I think if you ask employees, like, what's the real culture over here versus the one that's written down, then you'll get a more honest answer, because it's based on the, like, how do the current actions, decisions, back up what the actual culture is. Like, have you been in those situations?
Very rare,
Yeah.
very, very rare. When you do project work, and we have to remember we're talking about us as external consultants coming into existing cultures on projects. So our general conduct and mode of operation is to create great cultures through the work that we do, and not disrupt that or rock the boat or create shitty environments
Mm-hmm.
generally.
Mm-hmm.
That's our general mode of operation. But within the people, if I'm thinking about it holistically over a 30-year period, I'd say most of the teams, what we have is we don't necessarily have cultures that are fully representative of what's written down.
Mm-hmm.
We probably have not probably, more often than not, we have subcultures within those organizations that are playing into a project by project basis. Yeah. And that if we come back to practice spotting, and we come back to why we created Make Meaningful Work, created practice spotting, and did Make Meaningful Culture, it's very simple what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is very simple. Implementing it is the harder part. We're trying to make culture more practical, more explicit, more understandable through action, through what we do in the work that we do as we interact and relate together.
And I'll plus one on that. So yes, that's what you're doing, making culture more of a design object, maybe staying in the service design realm, in order to move away from, and I think I'll use that term for the episode title, move away from shitty work environments into areas where you can do meaningful work. That is the ultimate outcome, right?
That is, yes, one of the ultimate outcomes, and I'll say yes to that, because what we could say, well, we're spending, if you're lucky enough and or privileged enough to be able to um, get work, and you're lucky enough to get work that you enjoy in fields that you enjoy, and you're lucky enough to create value through your work. If you're lucky enough to have all of that in your life, and then you're spending a considerable percentage of time on those projects and in that work across different industries, then wouldn't it be nicer in that lived experience to have healthier
Mm-hmm.
cultures?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, wouldn't it be nice to have more times we wake up in the morning and to say, I'm energized to get to work. I'm really looking forward to be around these people and to produce meaningful, useful, non-wasteful stuff.
Yes, I think most of us watching or listening to this episode would say yes. Now, let's explore a challenge here, which might be very obvious and like the elephant in the room. Um, so if you subscribe to this idea that culture is a design object and you can actually mold and shape it to whatever you want it to be, um, you might say, okay, I'm into that, but I have leadership that is promoting a very different kind of culture based on, I don't know, fear, judgment, disrespect. Um, and they are calling the shots. They are making the important decisions. Now, I might be very into the idea that we want to create a meaningful culture, but if I'm taking actions in moments that matter, like you said, and like, isn't that just rearranging seats on the Titanic that's already sinking? Like,
Possibly, it could be a ship heading for the iceberg, and we're all doomed. It could be. It could be. If
so why
I'm
should we still do it?
well, if I'm hearing your question correctly, and challenge any of this, Mark, because that's part of the conversation, right? Um, Multifaceted, right? Maybe there are certain instances where you don't do it. Maybe there's certain instances where you head for the nearest, what is it, the lifeboat?
Yeah,
Get
yeah, like,
get the he-
yeah,
get the hell out of there, right?
yeah.
I mean, it could be that scenario. Another instance could be you don't have a choice. You're stuck on that boat, and there could be a whole host of reasons why you're stuck on that boat. It might be financially
Hmm.
related. It could be family related. It could be market related, economically related. You don't have any other choice right now. Let's assume you don't have a choice. Then, at a minimum, what we would suggest is if you're interacting with, dealing is a different word, interacting with, communicating with a leadership team where you feel that type of conduct is being propagated or illustrated through the interactions that you have with them, one thing that you could do is you could identify, number one, what's the situation in which that's happening. So there's multiple situations, right? It could be a weekly update meeting. It could be a one-on-one performance review. It could be a hallway discussion. You have to decide what that situation is. And then if you decide to take responsibility for it, and there's no judgment associated with that, if you decide not to take responsibility for it, you could have a very reasonable rationale not to do it. But if you do want to take responsibility for it, our suggestion is everybody can be responsible for one moment that matters. And everybody can be responsible for, in that interaction, being able to demonstrate through your conduct a different way. Now, then you could say, well, how does that land with the person that you're interacting with? Well, the only way you know is to experiment with that. And there's multiple ways you can experiment with that, right? And you can practice that. But at the end of the day, it's not like, oh, aren't I good because I've tried to do something. It's not about a self-congratulatory thing. But if you're committing and you're being responsible to want to see or explore, is the response going to be something different based on an alternative conduct in that moment that matters? Well, then you've got something to work with. If you choose not to do anything and then effectively suffer through it, you can't expect by some way of miracle that there's going to be someone that's going to come in and magically change and transform that system or that culture. So we're actually doing, I'm pleased for your question because we're actually doing something different. What we're doing is we're saying, start with what is it that you can do as an individual. It's not individualistic by nature, but what is it that you can take responsibility for? And if enough people learn practice spotting, and if enough people are doing that in moments that matter, the hypothesis suggests or the actual proof suggests that if enough people are doing it, suddenly you have a change, an improvement, a transformation of culture in action.
Could you take us through an example of practice spotting and moments that matter? And maybe, I don't know, let's take the value of being kind, the K in the SPARKLE acronym. Like, okay, practice spotting, moments that matter. Like, how does this work? What do I do?
Well, I'll take you through the really light version, and the way we're going to do it is, um, I'm not going to just um, sort of pontificate an example. I'd rather make you a participant and a collaborator in it.
Happy to be
So
the volunteer. Yes.
yeah, thank you. And what we can do is we can start with a problem or a situation that's meaningful to you, and start from that point. So when you think about, with all your experience, Mark, across, I'm assuming, have you worked inside organizations and outside as a consultant, or is it predominantly, what's your work experience been generally?
My work experience is primarily outside from an agency perspective. So that
Okay.
that is my
Okay, awesome.
default
So
mode.
that's good context to understand. So if you think about your agency experience and you think about problems that you've faced in interacting with different people, let's say it could be on client side, or it could be within your own team. And I realize you've got to be sensitive and careful here, but if you think about, like, what would be the one that's the biggest aggravation or critical or bugbear one for you? What would it be?
Somehow immediately something comes to my mind. So, and this is maybe one of my personal values, which also, when I was an agency owner, was translated in the agency values. So, for me, it's really important that people stick to what they've said, right? If you give me your word that you'll show up for this interview, uh, unless like we have a force majeure, I expect you to show up on time. And if it doesn't,
Right.
like that's bugbear. Yeah.
Yeah, understand. So have you had a situation where someone has promised to turn up and they haven't?
Yeah, countless happens every day, right?
Okay. So firstly, how, in terms of how that made you feel in response to that situation, how did it make you feel as connected to your own values, and why did you feel that way?
We're going into some therapy area here, but I think what happens to me, my initial gut reaction is a sense of disrespect.
And how does that play out? Like, in which way does that play out for you in terms of feeling disrespected?
It plays out in the sense that I feel agitated, regretful, annoyed, frustrated. Uh, you can add many adjectives here.
Okay. And what is it, if you look at their current conduct? So let's step back a little bit. We've identified a problem. Yes.
Hmm.
We've identified a situation in which that's playing out. And in that situation, what we have is we've got the conduct, the interactions, and the relationship that's playing out, and we're getting a sense of the moment that matters. The moment that matters is, I would suggest, and you can feed into this as well, but the moment that matters for you, in reference to feeling disrespected, is when they just don't turn up.
Hmm.
That makes you feel a certain way. That creates a reaction for you in reference to your response to that. Correct?
Yes, and
Yeah,
just as a matter of question, what we're now doing is the practice of practice spotting,
correct,
correct?
correct.
Yes.
Yeah, this is a lighter version of it, but this is the core
Sure.
of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
great, great. So, um, let's say this is a person, and perhaps this is true for you, but let's say this is a person that you can't just break the relationship with. You have to continue the relationship with, but what you would like to do is you would like to explore together with them as respectfully as you can what the alternative conduct could be. So if it was for yourself, the healthier conduct would be what? If it was for yourself, in terms of you've set a time, you want
Mhm.
you want to turn up, the healthier alternative conduct would be what?
The healthier conduct would be uh, the word acceptance, compassion, uh, the what's the opposite of feeling being more in the moment, like those kind of things.
Great. So what we would have you do is we've got a little conduct card. There's a
Hmm.
template for a conduct card. So that's the way to summarize this. And these things can take 5 minutes to do. So you've identified a problem, note that down. You've identified a situation as a little scenario or mini story to share. I'd organized with a person to turn up. The person didn't turn up. This is how it made me feel. This is how it made me feel about the other person. Then you write down what was the moment that matters. Let's say the moment that matters was when they didn't turn up. You said,
Hmm.
this is my current conduct. This is what I would like my alternative conduct to be. And let's say that that person is me. You would have the other person do exactly the same. And then what you want to do at the end of it is to get to some sort of agreement or an alignment on what the joint alternative conduct can be. So hopefully it doesn't happen again. So you've
Mm.
taken something that feels like what we would describe a sleepwalking, toxic, negative, difficult, whatever that state is that is
Sure.
contributing to bad culture. And the bad culture is, or the negative culture is, people are not being respectful of other people equal to turning up on time. And what we want to do is address that very quickly and turn it into the alternative conduct that's healthier. And then once that's done and documented, it could become a practice that then connects to a value, that then connects to other moments that matter across other teams, across the organization. And if it's done, if it's well practiced, it never has to come up again because it gets
Sure.
embodied, it gets done. And then you move on to the next problem and the next problem and the next problem. And if you've done that enough, Mark, final point, if you've done that enough, then you get a collective understanding and an aggregation of ownership equal to these conduct cards and these moments that matter, that are the embodied and lived culture and what people are taking responsibility for, versus I'm telling you, Mark, to turn up on time, which is different to me saying, Mark, I'm taking responsibility to turn up on time, but I appreciate that you've told me to turn up on time as well.
Great. Thank you for this example.
Welcome.
What I'm already sensing from this is that this is a very deliberate practice. You have to be open to this. You have to be willing to invest the time. There already has to be some sort of culture where people are willing to talk about this, do this. Um, have you seen, like, in which contexts or cultures does this have a fighting chance to actually start?
Not,
If you know what I mean.
yeah, I do know what you mean. I think it's another really astute and direct question. Um, I'll take the question to mean what are the conditions in which this has a chance to be successful? And I would
Yeah,
say,
and you already mentioned that it's not just about the entire organizations. It can be a team, it can be individuals. Like, I'm
yeah,
curious, like, what are those preconditions that need to be in
yeah.
place?
So a few. The first one that comes to mind is that you've got leaders either by title or position that are honestly taking responsibility for the development and the ongoing development of culture. They see it as something that needs to be continuously improved upon, number one. Number two, that within that leadership, either by title or position, or or by the way people are conducting themselves, because sometimes leaders are not leaders by their title or position, they're leaders by how they conduct
Sure.
themselves.
Yeah.
that there's a sense of an honesty and an openness to wanting to continuously learn and improve would be another condition. A third one would be that they're actually committing budget, they're committing money to it. A fourth one, if I were to say there was another one, I've got plenty, but I'll leave it with this, is that there's also a commitment to want to create the space, which
Mm,
we call it a Sparkle Studio, but it could be named anything. We call it a Sparkle Studio, where there's a space where people keep, just like we did.
hmm.
You beautifully got us to do an example, a light example of practice spotting, where that becomes an ongoing practice that people do, and then they continue to create the evolving set of practices that are documented and are representative of the culture at play.
All right.
Yeah.
So leadership, support, uh, budgets, physical space. I can imagine that's you rarely get to work with clients who are already able and willing to make this leap of faith into something that they haven't started, or probably their pain isn't that big that they want to go all in. Um, have you have you seen examples of where it starts smaller and in a more light version and then grows? Like how does this start usually?
I would say there are examples in which practice spotting can naturally live in what is already happening. So, for
Hmm.
example, people are already doing check-ins. Check-ins is a very common activity. So, my understanding recently, I did a little survey with a small group of people to ask about their check-ins. It sounds like I'm saying chickens, doesn't it? But check-ins,
Check-ins, yes.
check-ins. Um, I think they tend to be, and that's okay, but they tend to be more transactional by nature in terms of work items. But there's not a lot of check-ins associated with what practice spotting is intended to do, which is to understand what's actually happening in the conduct, interactions, and relationships between people. And are we documenting those practices? And do we have a clear understanding on what those moments that matter are? Another place it can exist is performance reviews. It could live very nicely within that. Another place that it could exist is in what sometimes companies do these sort of retreats or
Hmm.
company, I don't know, group hugs or whatever they call them. These, you know, that type of thing. It can exist in there. It could exist as a weekly one-on-one. It the whole I think the beauty of practice spotting is it's not intended to be heavy. It's intended
Mm,
to be a very light thing that people can do. What's the situation here? What's the moment that matters? What's the current conduct? What's the alternative conduct? How do we convert that into something that gets recorded? And how do we continuously learn and improve as a consequence of that? The place for it to insert itself
sure.
can be many.
Yeah. And I, again, what I'm hearing you say is that mostly the biggest prerequisite maybe is that you recognize as leadership on whichever level is that culture is one of the key ingredients of mm, being successful, a healthy, thriving, meaningful culture. Like if that understanding isn't there, if people take culture for granted, then you'll probably have a hard time selling this story.
I think that's fair. I really do. And we've studied plenty of research over the years where it says, culture only becomes an important thing after you grow to a certain number of
Mm,
people. But I don't entirely agree with that type of research. I think the development, our three branches of our Make Meaningful Work logo and our tree are character, leadership, and culture. So I think that leaving character, leadership, and cultural development to chance or to some sense of gamble, or
Yep.
it may, I don't think that doesn't end up very well for people.
You're
And it
throwing the
doesn't,
dice. Yeah.
yeah, it's risky. And you're also not, I think the role of leadership and the role of people playing that facilitating, um, that facilitating type of position is to help people see the connection between what it is that they're doing in their function equal to the performance and the varying ways that that gets measured, and also how that connects very strongly to the investment of the culture, leadership, and the character development of an organization. To me, that is the equivalent of maturity.
So um, I hope that for everybody who's still with us here, they're sort of getting the confidence that maybe this mythical thing, this intangible thing called culture, isn't as abstract as people might think that it is actually an object that you can design, that there are practices, frameworks, steps, prerequisites in order to get to a healthier, better culture. Um, I'm curious, like if we fast forward and let's say people are willing to experiment with this, adopt this, give this a try. Like, what's on the horizon? What have you seen in organizations that are willing to go through this process? Like, what is the transformation in the best case? What happens?
That's a great question again, Mark. I like your questions because they're well thought through and they're also not easy to answer. So that's why I love them. They get you to think, which is really good. Uh, I think what you're looking for are you're looking for best practices in the way that people conduct, interact, and relate to each other in moments that matter. And you'll notice that I've repeated that a number of different times, not because I'm trying to get that through to the audience in terms of our definition, but I'm also trying to get that through in terms of culture isn't culture isn't fully realized until it gets embodied by the people that exist within the culture through how they conduct themselves, how they behave. And so if we then tie that to, well, what does that look and feel like? It could be a few things. Number one, are we seeing a clarity and a focus and a commitment to what it is that we're all doing together? That could be one. Number two, it could be that we have created an environment, i.e., a culture, in which we can discuss, debate, disagree, and argue without people feeling like it's political or I'm out to get Mark because I don't agree with Mark.
Mm-hmm.
We've actually set up the environment where Mark in this instance is correct and I'm wrong based on the body of evidence that we have. And that's great because that's going to help the collective be more successful. And if I were to pick a third one, I would say that practice spotting is intended to be holistic in nature, meaning that it's intended to help people make more meaningful decisions and better decisions collectively. So if one of the outcomes is we're all making better decisions to help us all be more successful together, well then practice spotting and make meaningful culture is doing its job. But it has to be, as we've
Mm.
discussed repeatedly, and it's my final point, it has to be explicit. It has to be understood, not
And
by
the
chance.
word, yeah, meaningful, explicit, tangible, and the word that just emerged for me was being mindful about what you're doing, instead of mindless. So uh, okay, then this was already great. Before you wrap up, we're really curious, like, what's next for you? You've spent so much time on thinking about work culture. Um, what's next? What are you working on?
Two things. that come to mind. One is, what would be a program that most people could lean into and feel that it would be useful to them, whereby they could see the value of applying practice spotting. And what we've been thinking about in reference to that program is, there appears to be a significant reaction at the moment to AI, and what it means to my value in the function and the definition of what I'm doing in my job. So we're starting to think about, how could practice spotting be applied within the narrative of change and transformation that has been triggered by AI. And then what does that mean for people? Instead of looking at AI as a threat, you can look at AI as a partner that augments and supports what you could be doing better to prove your value, not to prove, but to demonstrate your value as a human through the soft skills. Because what
Mm-hmm.
comes up in research a lot is, currently, what comes through very strongly is, humans still have a huge advantage over AI when it comes to a plethora and a range of soft skills that AI simply can't do. So that's one, programmatically. And then the second one is our third book. So we've got Make Meaningful Work, first book, published in 2021. Make Meaningful Culture, second book, published earlier this year in 2025. And then the third book in the series will be Make Meaningful Education. Because interestingly, if we look at it from a systems or a service design lens, at the end of the day, education needs a revamp. And particularly in the age of AI, but even before AI, it needs a revamp. It needs to be relooked at, and we need to revisit what that means in terms of the role of leaders as educators, and what that means to be valuable human beings going forward to solve real problems in the world today.
Sounds like a important and noble mission to be on. If we are excited and want to follow your work, where would you direct us to?
You can either go to www.apogeehk.com. So that's apogeehk.com. And when I say E, that's like E for egg or E for elephant. Some people might hear A because of the accent. So apogeehk.com. Or they can go to makemeaningfulwork.com, and they can follow us there. And I've also got, we have a newsletter and a group on LinkedIn, and I'm publishing pretty regularly to that newsletter on LinkedIn, and I can share all those links with you.
I'll make sure that they
Uh,
are in the show notes for
yeah,
sure. Yeah.
yeah, and it'd be great to continue to grow a community of interest around this important question of, how can we make meaningful work?
And education. Then
Indeed.
before we leave you off the hook, we like to end our conversations with a question from you for us that you think would be worthwhile and meaningful to think about during our time walking the dog, doing the dishes, or taking a shower. So what's the question you feel is worth our time?
If there is meaningful work that you believe that you can contribute to, that plays into a healthier, sustainable, fruitful, peaceful, rewarding life for people on this planet, it may mean that we need to let go of some of the things that we believe to be true. What is it that you would like to do and or contribute to developing those models and those frameworks and those tools in order to realize that healthier today?
That's a question worth a 30-minute walk at least. So thanks for that. Then
They can ask. They can ask the dog.
they can ask the dog. Usually, it often comes up with the better answers. To be honest, I'm very curious what people will come up with, even if it leads to more questions. That's also good. Then I want to thank you for coming on, sharing your mission with us, sharing some practical ideas on how we can tame that mythical beast called culture and create something that is more meaningful for all of us. So thank you for coming on and taking the time to be here.
Mark, thank you to you. Really appreciate the time.
I have to say, after listening to Dan, what really resonated with me is that culture, which we often see as a big abstract force, is really just another design material. We can and should take a more mindful approach to shaping it. By actively engaging in small intentional actions, we can start to create meaningful outcomes, not just for our work, but for our own job satisfaction. The alternative, as Dan puts it, is just sleepwalking through our careers. A huge thanks to Dan for sharing his insights and reminding us all that we can be the change we want to see. If you enjoyed today's conversation, you can do me one big favor. Please click the like button on this video and leave a short comment if you haven't done so already. Not to feed the algorithms, but to let me know whether we are on the right track by addressing topics like this. Finally, before we part ways, please take a moment to reflect and celebrate that by joining us today, you have directed your attention towards learning and growing as a professional. So, from everyone who you are going to impact through your work, thank you for taking the time and making the commitment. My name is Mark Fontijn, and I look forward to having you with us again for a new conversation on the Service Design Show. Take care and see you soon.